Hi guys, the Metal Maniac back again, and in this video I'm going to be doing a review of the album Raging Death. It was released in 1987 and is actually a compilation album containing 2 songs from 5 different thrash metal bands. Those bands are Betrayal, Lethal Presence, Ravage, Sadist, and Executioner. Now, interestingly enough, 2 of these thrash metal bands would later become 2 of the biggest death metal bands ever. Ravage would later become Atheist, and the band Executioner would later become Obituary. Yeah. Now, before I get into the songs, I'm gonna name off the band members from each of these 5 bands. Anyway, so starting with Executioner, John Tardy on vocals, Donald Tardy on drums, Alan West on guitar, Jerome Gabriel on bass, and Trevor Perez on guitar. For Sadist, Darren Travis on guitar and vocals, Rob Moore on guitar, Steve DiGiorgio on bass, and John Allen on drums. For Lethal Presence, Jeff McLaughlin on vocals, Bobby Sadzek on guitar, Andrew Brown on guitar, and Steve Bill on bass, and Noah Joseph on drums. For Betrayal, Chris Kempsey on bass and vocals, James Johnson on guitar, James Carter on guitar, and Arlie Patton on drums. And finally, for Ravage, Kelly Schaefer on guitar and vocals, Steve Flynn on drums, Roger Patterson on bass, and yeah. So, hold on. Sorry, I'm trying to get the glare off the thing. There we go. Sorry, the lighting is not, it's not as bad as it usually is. I'm not recording this in the evening this time, but it's getting close to the late afternoon, so the sun's starting to go down, and I'm not having much natural light in here. But there was actual glare on the camera. I don't know if that showed up on the actual video, but I'll try to move this really quickly. Sorry, they're having technical difficulties. Oh, and I almost knocked my computer over. I'm sorry about that. Anyway. So the album starts off with the song Finally Arise, and oddly enough, I haven't heard this song in about 2 years. I don't think I've heard the song since I reviewed Cause of Death by Obituary. And even though I liked it back then, my first time listening to this after a long time, it's not as good as I remember, honestly. It's a song that, even though the vocals are really good, and for the most part the instrumentation is good, this song feels really weirdly put together. First off, just the transition between the fast-paced opening part to the more weirdly, not super slow, but not as fast mid-section, to the sort of fast end part. It's just a really weird flow of the song. And also for some reason, I don't know if this is probably not the case, but to me, it almost sounds so not disjointed, but it almost sounds so disjointed because, how do I say this? It feels like the song is shorter than it should be. It feels like it's only part of a longer song. It feels like it was a long song that they cut in half. And I didn't notice that on first listen when I first listened to the Cause of Death by Obituary version. Yeah, I don't know. It's just a really wonky song, very oddly put together, and yeah, it's one that, okay, I don't hate it, but I don't love it anymore. It's just an okay-ish song that's sort of really wonky and just really weirdly put together. But overall, it's okay. I was kind of disappointed when I listened to it again. I was like, this is not as good as I remember. But the vocals are probably the highlight on this song, though. The vocals are really good. They're not quite as, death metal-y as on the Obituary version, They're more thrash metal, but they have like a more of a almost proto death metal kind of sound to them. Yeah. So next up is the song "Strangled Breath" by Lethal Presence. Okay, so this song is actually mislabeled on here, as you can see, right about there. This says Strangled Death, but the song is actually titled Strangled Breath, not Strangled Death, so I don't know what happened there. Just probably miscommunication between the band members and the people who put this album together. Strangled Breath is actually one of my favorite songs by Lethal Presence, if not my favorite. It's actually the song that starts off their demo, the opening track, which I still need to review that demo. I have it here somewhere. Hold on. Oh, that fell over. Sorry, it's hard doing this with one hand. There it is. As you can see, I do have their demo, which I still need to review. Haven't got around to it yet, unfortunately. But as you can see, the song is called Strangled Breath, not Strangled Death. And I did double check. On the track listing of the original release of the demo, and yes, it is called Strangled Breath. So now, honestly, it's something that oddly enough, mislabeling of songs does happen quite more frequently than people would think, especially on like compilation albums of different bands. Usually the record label's just too busy, but just like getting all the songs on and stuff, probably just didn't even notice. Anyway, enough about the actual title. The song itself is fantastic. You get sort of like a almost old school Slayer vibe mixed with, other like vibes of other like Canadian thrash metal bands, like what's a good comparison? I'd say is Slaughter a good comparison? I don't know. But this song still is very unique. Honestly, I haven't heard many Canadian thrash metal bands or any other thrash metal bands or most other thrash metal bands in general sort of sounded quite like this. There's just a really cool mix of styles. There's this really cool sort of head-banging, catchy main riff. The solo is great, and in parts, what's his name again? Jeff McLaughlin sounds kind of like Tom Araya on the high notes. He does the more sort of like standard thrash metal vocals, but he does those high notes from time to time that sound very much like Tom Araya during the early days of Slayer, back when Tom Araya actually did the more high screeches once in a while. Yeah, just a fantastic, great old school thrash metal song. It's not overly complicated. Just it's more of just great old school bang your head thrash metal. It's fantastic. I love it. Next up is Destruction, Death, and Pain by Betrayal. I have talked about this more in length when I did my review of Betrayal's first demo, Helpless Souls. So I'm not going to talk on much about it here, other than it's a decent song. Just it is not one of my more favorite by them. Next up is probably my favorite song from this. It's featured on this compilation. Hold on. Anyway, next up is Brain Damage by Ravage. Holy shit. This honestly, I think this should have been the opening track, honestly, or on here. I don't think, if I remember correctly, this song was not the opening track on the Slay demo, but it should have been. Anyway, Brain Damage is such a great, just, like, the drums on this song are so pummeling, so just in your face, and so just savage. The riffs on here are just great, just aggressive, and just have a ferocity to them. The solo, there's actually technically two different solos, one in the middle, one slightly more towards the end. Both are just face-melting fast and just off the wall, honestly. This is just a fantastic song, and the vocals are actually quite different than on the any of the Atheist albums. They're definitely more proto death metal in here. They have the thrash metal-y kind of shouts, but it's a little bit more gravelly, a little bit more gruff sounding. Just a great sort of mashup of the different sort of types of vocals, like early death metal and like proto death metal slash, a more aggressive thrash metal. Yeah, just a fantastic song. Yeah, Brain Damage is a fantastic song. I could sit here all day just praising this song, honestly, but I have to get to the other stuff as well. Yeah. Next up is another fantastic song, Kill Team by Sadus. Now, for the longest time, I did not like this band, and I still don't like most of their stuff. In fact, I really only like their early demos. The vocals were definitely a little bit different on their early stuff. So the riffing on, I'm gonna get to the vocal. I'm gonna get back to the vocals in just a minute. I just want to talk about the actual rest of the song, rest of the instrumentation stuff really quickly. But the instrumentation is great. Just a very fast pace, great sort of just not super catchy riff, but I find it to be slightly catchy enough, but not overly catchy, where it has this very very good balance between a slightly more just rhythm, but not, I don't know. I can't really describe it that well, but it's on the balance between catchy but not distractingly so. Not in a bad way, just not like some other thrash metal songs that are good catchy songs, but kind of like a little bit more to the forefront. This is more more subtly catchy, if that makes sense. And a lot more simplistic, but done very very well. Yeah, the riffing is great. The solo is great as well. Very just very straight to the point. Not super. It's not like a wild chaotic solo like some other thrash metal. It's a bit more subtle. It's a bit more straight to the point. But it's still very memorable. But the vocals on top of everything else are probably the highlight of the song. There are just these very great, very unique sounding screeches. Like, it almost sounds like the vocalist is like some kind of like enraged eagle or some kind of, eagle or some other vicious bird of prey, It's just very cool, very unique. I've never heard any vocals like it before. It's just fantastic. But yeah, Kill Team by Sadus is fantastic. Also, getting back to their early stuff as well, their first two demos are probably my favorite thing that ever came out of that band. They got a bit more technical later on and a bit more, not mainstream, but a bit more streamlined, I guess. But early on, their first two demos, which I think this song came from either their first, I think their first demo, but I might be wrong, it might be their second demo. But yeah, just a fantastic song from their early period. Next up is another song by Betrayal called Another Sacrifice. This is actually quite unique to this compilation because unlike every other song on here, which was recorded which the original recordings were intended for their own releases, their own demos and stuff. Another Sacrifice by Betrayal was specifically recorded for this compilation. So you could only find it on this release, not on any Betrayal release. So that's interesting. And it is okay. The vocals aren't quite as good as on their first demo. They would definitely change styles later on after their first demo. They'd be a little bit more streamlined, a little bit more almost copying Exodus actually. But yeah, this just sort of marks the start of that sort of downhill spiral this band went on. While it's definitely not as bad as the stuff that would come out later from Betrayal, it's definitely nowhere near as good as anything from their first demo. Yeah, it's just okay. Next up is the song Like the Dead by Executioner. This one is definitely a lot better than Finally Arise. It feels a lot more well put together. It feels a lot more thought out. Musically, it's a lot more cohesive. The vocals are definitely more, they feel a lot more why can't I think of the word? Not professional, but a lot more uh, experienced. Like, I don't know, they just, everything just feels a bit more like everyone knew what they were gonna do with this song, where they were going with the song, rather than Finally Arise, which feels like just they just did whatever. But yeah, Like the Dead is great. It's a more of a mid-paced kind of moody song, not super slow or anything, but not super fast like a lot of other songs on here. It's just a great sort of departure from the fast-paced nature of everything else on here. I think it fits right well on where it is on the album. Next up is Twisted Face by Sadist. This is one of the only songs from their early period that actually made it onto one of their full-length albums. And it fits there because their full-length albums aren't really that good. And this song is like that. It's just very dull and very forgettable, honestly. But anyway. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Next up is Unholy Alliance by Lethal Presence. This is actually the title of their one and only demo. Again, I do have the compilation here that contains that demo as well as a bunch of previously unreleased rehearsal recordings that are just as good as the actual songs on the demo as well. This is probably their most well-known song, and it's the only song that the remastered version has been put onto YouTube. The only other way you could listen to the other songs on YouTube from that demo is like the pre-remastered recordings, which were the original recordings, and the audio quality is not great. And it's not the bad audio quality that's good. It's the best. So it's not so bad. It's bad. It's so not it's not quite good as not quite good. I'm rambling, but it's the remastered version of the demo that again I have here is definitely sounds a lot better. It's one of the very few instances of a remaster actually sounding better than the original recorded version of like an album or whatever. But anyway, Unholy Alliance is fantastic. Great riffing. Great. It feels somewhat of a really cool like a song that would be great live, and like I could just imagine them like a mosh pit going on. And like that, there's this riff near the middle of the song, right before the solo, and sort of after as well, before the end. That's just this really catchy, really vicious head-banging riff that definitely like again I imagine like when this was played live, there was like a mosh pit going on in the crowd, and it just feels like that. It has that energy to it, and it's just awesome. The solo on it as well is great. Another sort of wild, chaotic solo. The vocals again are fantastic. Just like with basically everything good about this song is everything good about pretty much every song from the demo and the rehearsal recordings as well. But yeah, this from a great song from a very underrated band. And then lastly is the song On They Slay by Ravage. It was supposed to be the title track of their demo. I'll actually get into a lot more about this and their bands that are on here later in the video, before the end of the video. But anyway, On They Slay is great as well. I think it was the last track on that demo. Yeah, just another great. It's not quite as pummeling and vicious and brutal as sounding as the song Brain Damage, but it's still great. It's actually a little bit slightly faster paced than Brain Damage. It has more of a sort of like a sharpness to just the way the instrumentation is. Like like I would say like Brain Damage is more like a brutal pounding to the skull, whereas On They Slay is more of a slice, like an axe coming down on you, But it's a bit more like precise, brutal, rather than just pummeling wildly, you know. Really great riffing, great solo work, and I think this might be a fan favorite, if I remember hearing correctly. But yeah, just another fantastic track, and it actually is the track that ends this compilation, and what a great end to it. But yeah. So before I get into my final thoughts on the verdict, I want to show off the artwork really quickly and then talk a little bit more about just the release of this and the bands that are featured on here. So first up, the artwork is probably some of the best artwork for a metal album I've ever seen. And probably one of my favorite depictions of a demon on an album. I mean, look at that. That is ferocious. Yeah, sure, it's a simple black and white image, you might say, but I find that some of the best album arts and demo artworks are more of the simple black and white sketch look things rather than the more fleshed out, multicolored sort of like albums you would see on like a lot of like death metal albums and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, you just get the black and white with a little extra color in there with the red for like the mist in the back, like the mist in the background, and then the logo. Yeah, I love that. Like the demon's also carrying a severed head, which is screaming. Very brutal. Also you get the bands right there. And then the logo itself, which is one of my favorite design logos. Raging Death in that really cool, very sharp, spiky font. And then there's the back featuring the credits, the track listing, the band member photos, as well as the record label here, or record label logo. So, for an album that is an album that I've never really covered on this channel before in terms of just the way the compilation is, like all the other compilations I've featured on this channel are compilations that contain songs from one band. It's like a band like a compilation of like a couple of demo songs from one band or whatever. This is unique, and this is the first one I've covered on this channel that has songs by multiple bands. Wait, excuse me, hold on. All right, so it's kind of a unique kind of thing, I guess. Anyway, so all of these bands, all these 5 bands, out of all of them, only 2 really made it big, and only 2 left like a actual like impact past the time they split up. Ravage, although technically Ravage is still around, although they haven't released anything in quite a long time. And so I don't know, maybe they're still around. Maybe they're still around, or maybe the Metal Archives is wrong about them still being active. I have no clue. But they've been kind of dormant for a while. At least I haven't seen anything from them or even seen a live video of them recently. But Ravage, of course, became not obituary, atheist, but yeah, or maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something because I haven't seen it. I haven't seen. No, I'm right. I'm right. Sorry, I'm thinking of Obituary that's been releasing stuff recently, not Ravage. Sorry, I was getting those bands confused. But yeah, Obituary is still releasing a lot of stuff. Atheist hasn't released stuff in quite a while, anything in quite a while. But supposedly they're still active. But yeah. Obituary again is probably the biggest name on here, although they were called Executioner then, but they're probably the most successful out of these 5 bands. Sadus, yeah, I don't think they're active anymore. Lethal Presence is, I know for sure, aren't active anymore. In fact, I think they disbanded shortly. I think like 2 or 3 years after their demo was released. Betrayal are still around, but they haven't released anything good since their first demo in 1986. Besides their songs on here, of course. Yeah. Anyway, so overall, I'm gonna give this probably a 9.8 out of 10. For this being a compilation album, usually compilation albums featuring multiple different bands can be very sort of like wonky in the quality of the songs because they're from multiple different bands. Some bands can have great songs, some bands can have excuse me, some bands can have great songs, some bands can have not so great songs, and even some great bands can have bad songs once in a while. But I find for the most part, most of the songs on here are fantastic. Strangled Breath. I almost got that wrong because I was looking at the track listing and it said Strangled Death because it's mislabeled. But Strangled Breath, DDP, Destruction, Death, and Pain, Brain Damage, Kill Team, Like the Dead, Unholy Alliance, and On They Slay are all absolutely fantastic songs. And really the only reason why I'm not giving it a 10 out of 10 is for songs like Finally Arise, and what was it? Twisted Face. Those ones are again aren't that great, but actually now that I think about it, I'm gonna give it a little higher rating. I'm going to probably give it a 9.9 out of 10, so almost a 10 out of 10, because I do think this is an almost perfect compilation. Again, if the songs Twisted Face and Finally Arise were replaced with maybe two other songs from these bands, maybe it would have been 10 out of 10, but I'd say it's a near perfect compilation, honestly. But yeah, also this this album is super hard to find. And even though it's been re-released twice, I think both re-releases were, or at least the second re-release was a limited number release. I think like 100 copies or something. So this compilation was re-released in 1988 on vinyl again, just like the original here. And then it was re-released again sometime, I believe, I can't remember exactly, but it was either the late 2000s or early 2010s. It was re-released on cassette. I don't remember exactly, again, I don't remember exactly what year it was, but yeah, that was a limited release. But even though this, I keep calling it a demo, sorry, this compilation was a big deal back in the day, it's sort of unfortunately sort of fallen into obscurity nowadays. Very few people know of or remember this compilation. I think the only people who really sort of know of it are the people who had it back in the day and who've listened to it, or just people who have just randomly somehow stumbled across it somehow. Like me, I've just kind of, it just randomly showed up in my recommended on YouTube about like 3 years ago now. I was at work one day, like on a break, and I was listening to another thing that actually showed up on my recommendations for some reason, being the Lethal Presence demo. I was listening to that. And I kind of stopped it at one point near the end because I saw something in the recommendation, and it was this cover. For whatever reason, I didn't listen to it because I wanted to finish it. Then I kind of forgot about it, and then only a couple months later, I was watching a video by what was it called? It's another YouTube channel. What was it? I can't remember. What was it called? Banger TV, I think. Banger TV. And they were talking about early like death metal releases, and they had a couple of albums in the background, and this was one of them. And I saw this, and it immediately caught my eye, and I remembered seeing this on my recommendations and just couldn't find it again for some reason. I don't know why, it just never showed up again. And I completely forgot what it was called. And then I see it, and I'm like, Raging Death. And then they just never talk about it. They never mention it, never talk about it. They talked about all the other albums that was featured in the background of their video, except this one. And it's like, oh crap, I want to know more about this. So then I just looked it up, and then I listened to it, and I was blown away. It took me a long time to finally get my hands on one. Now, the most common version you'll find on like Discogs or eBay or something is the second version released in 1988. And it's exactly the same. The only difference is the fact that it has a hype sticker on the corner, as well as a slightly different center logo on the actual vinyl. The center logo on this vinyl is just a blank red logo with the track listing and the record label logo on it. Whereas the second vinyl version has a smaller image of the cover art on it. Yeah. Overall, like I said, it's a near perfect album / compilation album. And if you can, I do highly recommend you guys check this out and try to track it down if you can. If you like old school thrash metal and like proto death metal and stuff like that, this is definitely an album you won't be disappointed with. Yeah. Also, I will be putting a link in the description to be able to listen to the album. Yeah, definitely look for the link down below in the description to listen to it for yourselves. But anyway, that's about it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you next time.